Coming up on this week's show, the latest big-budget video game movie is coming.
An arcade classic comes to the 32X.
And we talk Strategic Simulations and Midway with Brian Lowe.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our wonderful mates at Bitmap Books. Now, this is everyone's favourite Amiga book. Commodore Amiga, a visual compendium, a real celebration of the 16-bit legendary Commodore machine, celebrating all the early titles like Defender of the Crown, Barbarian, lots more as well. Marble Madness is in there. And then those later games that we all grew up playing, Space Harrier, Rainbow Islands, Cannon Fodder, Speedball, Worms, of course, in there as well. A real celebration of the Amiga, over 420 pages, and bringing to life more than 140 of the biggest titles. You can check that out and the rest of their retro gaming collection right now at bitmapbooks.com. And with our friends at PCBWay. Now, they offer a fully featured custom PCB prototyping service with low-cost, fast turnaround, quality boards. So if you're working on a retro project right now, definitely worth checking them out. They also offer services like 3D printing and injection molding, and they're huge supporters of the retro community. So check out their website, get an instant quote for your project right now at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 378, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to have you joining us for another hour-ish of retro gaming chat, bringing you up to speed on what's been happening in the wonderful world of retro gaming and technology from over the last 7 days. And of course, a veteran of the industry coming on in the second half of the podcast to share some of their memories, their time working in the industry, the incredible games that they've worked on as well. All of that coming up. And of course, a very busy couple of weeks coming up now that we are well and truly into summer. So that's like cutting the grass today. And my sunglasses on this afternoon. You feeling summery, boys?
I've planted my vegetables, so I've been tending to the garden.
I've had a choc ice today as well.
Wow. I don't think I've had a choc ice since I was a kid, but it was always, when the ice cream van would come down the street and he said to you, Mum, can I have a pan for the ice cream, Magic? But we got choc ices in the freezer. So, yeah, it always makes me think of bad memories of not having nice ice cream back in the day, but I'm sure they're a lot nicer now, Joe.
I really enjoy it.
We have got a really busy week coming up. We're going to be out and about over the next week. Actually, quite weirdly, we're all going to be at separate events over the next week. Starting with you this coming weekend, Joe. Sunday, you're going to be selling off all of your video games collection. Is that right?
Not quite right. So I'm going to be at the Birmingham Gaming Market on Sunday, the 21st of May, at the Custard Factory, which is just outside of the Birmingham City Centre near the Bullring, not too far from the Bullring. I'm going to be there with my friend Jason as Days of Thunder Gaming, which is his gaming stall. I'm going to be, bit Del Boying, flogging games and stuff. But if you're there and you want to come say hello or whatever, come say hi. I love it. It shows him up as well because he gets really embarrassed when everybody comes over and he goes, "You, Joe." I love it a little bit as well. But yeah, I'm going to be there, doing the sweet deals on Mega Drive games and stuff.
And you only charge 25 quid for a selfie, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're going to be there this coming weekend. I was going to make us all do the accent of where we're going to be, but I won't ask you to do a Brummie and
I don't want to offend
anybody. So, and you're going to be in Manchester on a Thursday next week.
Yeah. We all love each other as well. We're not doing these separately because we're all angry with each other.
That's a good point.
We're all going to our separate things because Dan is going to be heading off actually when I'm doing this one. So I am going to Format in Manchester, which looks like an awesome event. It's on Thursday, the 25th of May, and it's kind of one that I've never been to before. I hear it's fantastic. Paul Monahan of Amiga Addict's going to be there as well, so we're going to be chatting like magazines and stuff like that.
A bunch of the guys from Rare are going to be there as well.
A bunch of the guys from Rare, having a nice drink, and it's all about the kind of nightlife movement and gaming and entertainment and all of that. It should be exciting. Manchester's a really happening place.
Yeah, and if you check the show notes, we've got a little discount where you can get 25% off the ticket price for that if you want to go along. I was desperate to come to that as well, but I'm off to Poland to Pixel Heaven on Friday, and I checked flights everywhere. I just assumed, Manchester, I could come to that on Thursday night. I could get a flight on Friday morning out to Poland. Turns out the only way I could get there was actually driving overnight, I'd have to leave at about 1 o'clock in the morning from Manchester to get to Stansted.
Oh my God.
For 7 o'clock in the morning. So that didn't sound too much fun. So unfortunately, I've got to miss format, but I am looking really excited to this big event that's happening in Poland, in Warsaw next weekend, Pixel Heaven, which I've been to once before as well. Really good event out there. And, like they always do, they've invited a load of guests out there. There's loads of great panels, a lot of partying as well. Cheap drinks in Poland.
You're going to get some Polish sausage, Dan?
I've been a vegetarian probably, unless they do vegetarian sausage.
They might, yeah.
Yeah, they might. Really cool place. I love Warsaw last time I was there. And I'm actually going to be on stage on Friday afternoon with David Pleasance, formerly of Commodore. We're going to be doing a little half an hour long celebration of the Amiga CD32, which actually turns 30 years old in September this year.
Makes me feel old.
Yeah, I remember buying a magazine and reading about that when I was a kid. Definitely doesn't feel 30 years ago. But if you are going to be there this weekend or any of those events, come say hi. We always love meeting our audience as well. So it's we're definitely approachable. Please come say hi to us if you're going to be at any of these events over the next week or so. And of course, we'll link up everywhere we're going to be in our show notes. And there are plenty more of events coming up throughout the summer as well. If you want to come along and say hi to us in person, it's always very cool. Now, we have got an amazing guest on the podcast this week, and this one is a really interesting approach and a different angle to many games you might have heard about before. Obviously, these are quite legendary titles from companies like Midway, but actually concentrating a bit more on the PC side of them.
Yeah, so I did this solo, and it's me and Brian Lowe. And Brian Lowe's a fascinating guest. He's kind of doesn't do that many interviews and stuff, so it's really cool to get him on. And he started at Strategic Simulations Inc., which was a kind of role play, Dungeons and Dragons style games came out of there. Eye of the Beholder was one as well, Pools of Darkness. He was doing a lot of testing on that. And then he later on went on to Midway. And of course, we all know about Midway. Interestingly, with this interview, we talk about, going onto the PC. And Midway were actually a company that started doing PC ports quite early on. And, this is a time where PC games didn't really kind of have many console ports or many straight from arcade ones. And it's really interesting hearing about how they could get like the actual coin ops in the room and then, reference them, but also then move on to many systems. So he's done so much development. He's been associate producer for stuff like the Mortal Kombat Trilogy, Rampage World Tour, Robotron X as well. A lot of these kind of arcade remakes and, kind of ones where they jazz them up a bit and they put them on like a new system. And he was doing that like at a time when people weren't really doing that, where these games weren't as, retro as they kind of are now.
You talk about Gex as well, which,
yes.
that is one of the best games on the 3DO. I know. And it's interesting because you talk to him about Gex and he kind of feels the same as me. That game is actually quite underrated. I know it gets slated a lot, by YouTube reviews and stuff now, but it was interesting to hear about how his work
and Pandemonium as well, which I absolutely love. But later on, he went on to stuff like the Xbox 360, so did stuff like, Phantasy Star 2, Gunstar Heroes, Sonic and Knuckles. So it's a really interesting conversation, this one, and I really enjoyed getting Brian on.
Yeah, so he's going to be on the show in around 30 minutes from now. Brian Lowe, our special guest this week. And of course, before that, we like to bring you up to speed on what's been happening in retro over the last week. And obviously, we're into summer now, and normally things start to quieten down a little bit in the summer months. But actually, been quite a lot happening in retro over the last week or so, including, it does feel like, I don't want to jinx anything, but it kind of feels like recently, there have been some decent video game adaptations into movies. Of course, we had the Tetris movie.
Yeah, I'm actually excited about the BlackBerry movie, about the BlackBerry phones. I know it's not video games, but still tech, and that one's getting really good reviews at the moment. It's in the cinema, so I'm hyped for that.
And we had, Sonic and Mario movies and even, Mortal Kombat as well. I know Joe and I are big fans of that. And it turns out that there is another big video game franchise that is coming to the silver screen. Gran Turismo is getting a movie. And this is actually quite an interesting approach to a film, I think.
This is so obviously we have the Patreon news, and I remember about a year ago on the Patreon news we discussed upcoming video game adaptations, and Gran Turismo was one of them that like Hollywood was adapting. And I remember thinking like, this is going to be so how do you like put Gran Turismo into a film? Ravi, either Ravi knows somebody in Hollywood or knows somebody at Sony. It was you who turned around and said, unless they actually base it on the game Gran Turismo.
Yeah, me and Quentin Tarantino were like that.
And the film from the trailer, it's based on the game Gran Turismo. It's kind of like it's meant to be based on true events, isn't it? And
it's an interesting concept. Yeah, it's kind of like the main guy's playing it, and then he's playing it on like a proper rig though, like with wheels and pedals and everything like that. Which I don't know if they're that popular anymore. They must be in this kind of niche of modern racing games and stuff to have these setups, because I can imagine they've improved and stuff a lot from when we used to have them.
Well, these are like hardcore racing fans have. My mate Griffo loves his racing games. He's got a proper rig like this as well. But actually, yeah, I mean, this is not just... I mean, originally, when I heard they're doing a Gran Turismo movie, I thought it's going to be a bit like, Fast and Furious or something like that.
Same.
But actually, this is it's based on a true story of a guy called Jan Mardenborough, who was a teenage Gran Turismo player, and he's that good on the game. He actually won a series of Nissan competitions, and then he became an actual professional race car driver after his, honing his skills on Gran Turismo.
Yeah, and the film is based on the story and the opportunity that he gets to do that. So they're kind of like, I imagine there's going to be a lot of dramatization of it because it's Hollywood. Yeah. It's, they've got to do that. But there's big names in it. We've got David Harbour, from Stranger Things in there.
Jim Harper, yeah.
Yeah, we've got Orlando Bloom in there as well. So some really, really big names. And I'm not a big fan of Gran Turismo, like never really been a fan of it or anything like that. I'm not a big fan of racing games or, car films and stuff, but it sucked me in. The trailer sucked me in, I'm not going to lie. I thought it looked pretty good. And it's only in cinemas. It's not like a Apple TV or anything like that. It's a full Sony production coming out on August 11th. I mean, not that like Apple TV and stuff isn't full productions, but it's a full Hollywood budget big film, which is I think is really interesting to see, and I think it'll do quite well. And I think you're right there, Dan. We are seeing a real turn in video game films. I think and people who aren't just gamers are actually starting to see these as like actual viable ways of telling a story, if that makes sense.
I think it's an interesting story. I didn't know that it was true. When I looked at the kind of trailer, I thought this is a bit rubbishy because I thought it was just not based on actual fact. But seeing that that's a fact, that's really interesting, because I had a guy at school who was into professional racing, and the way that they would get into that is they'd usually have a go-kart, and they'd have like a go-kart team, and then they'd go through the leagues and the ranks, and then go into like faster cars and stuff like that. So coming in through the route of a video game is interesting. Of course, it looks like a massive product placement. Like every single clip in there is just...
It is Sony after all.
Yeah, it's just rammed full of like products in there. But then I guess that racing world also is, every suit is like got sponsorship all over it and stuff. So yeah, it does look interesting. And I kind of like this approach, just showing this different route and, coming from the computer and playing it to actually doing it in real life, where you're right, it's fast, it's dangerous, you can die.
I've got one slight complaint though, which is a few people in the YouTube comments have agreed with me on this. Don't you find this a trend now when basically trailers show you the entire plot of the movie in 2 minutes?
Yeah.
And it's like, no surprises at all now.
I've been enjoying one thing which they've started to do, where they do little teasers, and the teaser's usually the first like 2 minutes of the film. And then you're like, oh, that's good, because, the rest of it you can enjoy.
Yeah. And apparently, you'll be pleased about this, Ravi. Jerry Halliwell from the Spice Girls is going to be in here as well. As a resident Spice Girls fan, I'm sure you're pleased about that news.
Yeah, I was more into Posh, so yeah.
Yeah, of course you were. And this is coming out in cinemas, like you said, on the 11th of August, so only a couple of months away. It looks like it could be one of this year's big summer blockbusters. So I was thinking the other day, I haven't been to the cinema for ages, so that might be a good excuse to get back out there, because a lot of movies now, they always come out on the streaming platforms as well.
Yeah, well, this Blackberry one's out in the cinema at the moment. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, good to get people back in there. So we'll link the trailer in the show notes if you want to check out that so far. Now, this looks very cool and definitely up your street, Joe. As soon as I saw this, I thought, it is that style that we saw in Cuphead, particularly a couple of years ago. This is a game called Mouse. Now, this is a noir retro shooter inspired by that kind of 1940s, 1950 black and white kind of cartoon style, isn't it? That seems to be very back in again recently in video games.
Yeah, I can't help but look at it and think, like, say, Cuphead. Like, it screams Cuphead. And at first, because I've seen this everywhere, I thought it was from the creators of Cuphead, but it's not. It's got a completely different studio and stuff, but why not go for it? It was a popular, Cuphead was popular, and that art style is popular, and you kind of associate it with kind of like Disney in my head, like those.
Apparently, it's called Rubber Hose is the animation style.
But I was going to say, I think
Hanna-Barbera as well, and that kind of style mix.
Yeah, Hanna-Barbera. I feel for me it was like a little bit later, but like that Rubber Hose style, as Dan says, I always think early Disney, but I think just like a lot of cartoons looked like that in the 1920s and 1930s. But at the moment, this is kind of like a proof of concept kind of. Well, it's a running demo, but there's no like environments in it. It's just the characters and the weapons at the moment, and the environments are all kind of just plain flat like buildings and stuff like that.
Is it a VR game? It from what I've seen from the footage, the movement of the FPS shooter, it seems like a kind of VR title to me.
I don't think it is. No. I've not seen anywhere that it's a VR game. It just says it's a.
It could work in VR. Though,
it could work in VR, but it just says it's a retro shooter. And obviously with it being inspired by classic cartoons, a lot of the death animations of that very like Tom and Jerry, you shoot them in their head and their head blows up kind of thing.
Yeah.
Really silly over the top animations, but it looks the characters and the death animations and stuff that look absolutely beautiful.
And it's all in black and white as well, which is something that you don't really see these days, and interesting to kind of be something that we haven't mentioned, just because it does stand out so well.
Yeah, you know what?
Aesthetic.
It didn't even cross my mind that it was in black and white, because the aesthetic suits it so well. Like, it didn't even occur to me that it's in black and white. I think, because of the animation style and the artwork of it is so good.
It just fits it so well.
It just fits it so well. And it's being developed by an independent development team called Fumi Games from Poland. So I've not heard of them myself, but that if they can pull this off, I think it looks absolutely excellent. It says it's going to be a story-driven shooter, and it's going to be about murder and deception, in the big corrupt city. That might indicate to me that there might not be much of a multiplayer on it, and that wouldn't surprise me because of the art style. I think some of the animations are going to have to be very scripted, if that makes some of like the story,
it's
the
interesting.
campaign levels and stuff.
It says the way that you approach people, you can differ. So you can do like run and gun, or jump and dodge, or carefully plan the attacks. Last of Us or something, where you've got the kind of choice of going in there and taking on a level, and that adds a good replayability factor in there.
Yeah,
absolutely. I love the weapons as well. They're all kind of, from that era on. Like your Tommy guns in there as well. You've even got like a dynamite, that looks very old school Disney, like you said, or Warner Brothers. So yeah, I think it does look really interesting. And I mean, obviously the first person genre is a genre that's kind of been, done to death over the last 30 years or so. And it's interesting to see kind of a quite creative and unique approach to it, isn't it? I think definitely it looks different to any other FPS game that I've played before. And currently there is no release date as yet, and like Jay said, it's only pretty much a trailer that you can watch right now. But if you keep an eye on the Steam page, I'm sure there'll be
I think there's a few hints to it being VR here, where you've got on the Steam page it actually says partial controller support. So maybe like the controller support would be changing weapons or something. But I'm just hoping this is VR, because I want to get into a like mad animated 1920s land.
Yeah, and it does look like the style of it would really suit virtual reality, actually. Some of the screen shaking and stuff might make you a bit screen sick. We'll have to turn that down a little bit if it's in VR when you shoot your weapons. But it does look very cool. So that's got Mouse. Release date to be announced. Now, I always love seeing updates to my favourite games, and I always like seeing games ported to hardware that doesn't get much love these days. And someone has basically improved the Mega Drive version of Golden Axe, harnessing the power of the 32X.
Yeah, this really caught my attention. So, yeah, Golden Axe 32X edition. Now, I know you're really familiar with the arcade version of Golden Axe, aren't you, Dan?
Yeah.
So I'm going to be leaning on you here a little bit, because I've only ever played it a couple of times. I'm more the Golden Axe, for the Sega Mega Drive. That was the version I grew up with. But I know the home port and the arcade port are very similar. Like, Sega did a really good job of porting Golden Axe Arcade to the Mega Drive. I know, to the untrained eye, it's kind of one for one. But I know there was a few things missing in backgrounds, and there was quite a few sound effects missing, and the music was slightly different and stuff like that. But this has been created by a user called Visser. It's meant to enhance the 1989 home version. So some of the maps are reworked based on the arcade version, and so they kind of like, how do I describe it? Like obviously it's a belt scrolling sidelong beat 'em up, but they've kind of like altered the backgrounds and like the layout of the level to match the arcade version of it, more closely.
Yeah, 'cause some of the levels were cut down a bit, I think, on the Mega Drive, probably for space reasons, and some of the backgrounds weren't quite as high resolution as they were on the arcade.
Yeah, absolutely. It's improved some of the animations in the backgrounds and some of the animations in the enemies. For example, the level where you're on the back of the giant eagle and the giant turtle. In the arcade versions, there were some animations of like the eyes moving and the feathers moving and stuff. They've added all that into the game. Uses the door animations which were present in the arcade machine. It also has the demo where the game plays itself and shows off the magic. So they're all just like little like things that make it a lot closer to the arcade experience. But something you pointed out to me when we were talking about this earlier on is the sound effects of the game are still the Mega Drive version. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, by the looks of this, I haven't tried this ROM hack yet, but from the video I've watched, that's one thing that I would like to see more of in ports of Golden Axe. Because even when you play, the version on like Xbox Live, that hasn't got because in the original arcade game, they sample sound effects from movies, didn't they? Rambo. There's a lot of like Rambo screams and stuff in there as well. I understand why they don't usually put them in. Because obviously, copyright wasn't really much of a thing in video games. When that came out back in the late 80s, they could kind of get away with it because video games were quite an underground thing. So I get why now they don't, but I think, for a fan project, it would be nice if they'd maybe could insert some of those, the actual movie rip sound effects into their home ports as well. Yeah. It could be one thing that they do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, whenever I play Golden Axe, which is definitely a yearly thing, on like a Mega Drive compilation, I always do the sound effects like from the enemies dying when they just go like like that. Like I do like them. Yeah. But the catch of it is it's a 32X version, but he can't get it to run on the actual 32X hardware. So it runs in 32X emulation, no problems. But when you run it on the 32X, like through like an EverDrive, it crashes after the character select screen. So he's actually invited anyone that wants to take a shot at fixing the bug to, a chance at the source code. So if you reach out to him, he will send people the source code and say, look, get it running on the 32X like hardware. So it runs an emulation. That's fantastic. But let's actually get it on the hardware. That's where he's at with it.
Yeah, and I think that, that makes sense as well. Because obviously it looks like, if it's running on the emulator, it must just be a small bug that means it's crashing on the original hardware. When you get past that one bug, hopefully the rest of the game will run fine. But yeah, it does seem very cool. And I think just having something new developed for the 32X as well, because, you don't see much homebrew for the 32X. Not that I've explored the scene much, but I've got a 32X, but I haven't really seen much coming along. We always hear about new Dreamcast games, new Game Boy games, but 32X doesn't seem to get a lot of love, really, does it?
Yeah, you always hear, the new Dreamcast game or, a Mega CD port or something like that. But yeah, I can't say I see much of the 32X. Maybe I'm missing it and it's all really, really underground, but yeah, it's good to see seeing some love.
I think it's because a lot of people obviously didn't buy them back in the day. I rember when the 32X came out, the Saturn wasn't far behind it. So everyone just thought, I'll wait for the Saturn, if you're a Sega fan. And you were talking to me the other day that you kind of feel like you've missed the boat on the 32X now, because, a decade ago you could pick them up for like 20 quid.
Oh, I've definitely missed the boat on them. They're like 300 quid now in the UK. Like, God. It's, maybe about 200 for an unboxed one, but, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. You managed to scoop one up for like 80 quid, was it? 70 quid? And even then it was...
I think I got it less. I think it was like 59 or something. Yeah, because you didn't have the wire with it or something.
It was about 5 years ago, but even then you were like, I need to get... I remember you being like, I need to get one of these before they get too much because they're just going up and up and up. And I remember seeing them in Game Station and stuff like that for like 20 quid around 2010, 2008. And now I'm just like, man, now I'm an adult with adult money. I just can't bear to spend like £300 on one. Like, it's just so much money. And yeah, the games for them are really expensive as well. And there's only a handful of, kind of like well-known good games for the 32X. And they're all just as expensive as the actual console itself. So, but yeah, it's good to see, some homebrew hacked love for it, that you can emulate if you want to. Well, you have to.
Yeah, well, hopefully someone will get that working on the original hardware soon. I know there's a lot of ingenuity in the retro community. I'm sure someone will get it up and running. So if you want to check out the link, I'll link that up. It's on romhacking.net in our show notes at theretrohour.com, or check your podcast app notes. Now, Ravi, have you ever wanted a 386 PC in your pocket?
Yes, I have. I've wanted one in my house, not in my pocket, but having it in my pocket is an absolute bonus. So this story is from Janir, and he submitted it on our Discord. This is really cool. This is called the Hand 386, and it's a handheld. It's kind of, they say, Nintendo 2DS form factor. I think it's a bit cooler than a 2DS because it's got a keyboard in there, and this is an actual device that isn't using FPGA. It's not using any emulation. It's using real chips. And
so there's a real 386 processor.
Real 386 processor in there. You've got video RAM. You've got the OPL3 chip for the sound. You've got actual RAM in there as well. Your BIOS, your VBIOS. It's really cool. This is sold on AliExpress, and I'm noticing that there are more of these cool little devices popping onto AliExpress. And what do you think of the form factor of this, guys? Like, it's got a battery in there as well. You've even got your PS2 keyboard that you can plug in at the side.
I think it's really cool. I mean, it kind of reminds me a bit of PDAs that you get in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
They had those really small kind of keys on there. I've got like an old Sharp PDA somewhere that's quite similar. But yeah, I mean, you've got it's a widescreen display that's on there. So it's kind of looks like 16:9 kind of form factor, doesn't it, with the keyboard underneath? And I mean, you check out this video here on the screenshots as well on this article in Tom's Hardware, and they've got it running Windows 95 on here. You've got 40 megahertz 386 CPU in there, 8 megabytes of RAM.
It's pretty
compact
fast,
flash storage.
Yeah, you've got a gig compact flash in there as well, and you'll be able to change that out and everything. Now, interestingly, looking at it, it's kind of unavailable at the moment on AliExpress, and I probably think this is because Tom's Hardware has featured it. And that's
right. You think it's sold out now based on this article?
Yeah, I think it's basically sold out straight away. But there are other ones that are available, and the price of it isn't that bad. I think it was around £160 for what you're getting. I don't know what the quality of the keyboard's going to be like. There's
I mean, they were never that great on these kind of small PDA devices anyway.
It could be a bit too clicky or something, but. Also, looking at the bottom of this article as well, there's another link to another device which is actually available, which is more of a kind of a notebook form, which is the Book 8088, and that's actually got chips in there as well, and you could put that in, and that's 165 for that one, but that's more of a CGA kind of computer, like an older IBM. For the
an 8088 processor.
Yeah, exactly. And you actually have the processors that you can clip into there. But I think this is cool that they're going into this like MS-DOS era, and they're not just making a cheap kind of emulator or even just an FPGA board and then reprogramming it or something. They're actually getting the original chips and doing it. This is pretty innovative, and I can't wait to see more of these devices and see people try them out, check them on YouTube and stuff. I really like this link.
There's some people in the comments on this Tom's Hardware article. The first guy in here is going, some of the dumbest products I've seen in a while. Why not make it at least a 486DX? I've got a 486DX. That thing needs a heatsink and a fan on there, to run reliably, at least at 100 megahertz like I've got mine.
Yeah, I just want to play like Jazz Jackrabbit or something on there, on the move,
And people are saying, it won't run Doom at good quality. You might get Wolfenstein running on here, but I'm not sure that's the point of this. I mean, I'm looking at maybe who is the target market for these devices. And I've got a feeling it's maybe that first one, the 386 handheld, that could be, maybe aimed at retro games players because it's got the video card and stuff on there as well.
Yeah.
But I think that the Book 8088, that thing is probably more aimed at maybe industrial users, who maybe need to like emulate, well, not emulate, actually run software made for these ancient machines.
I want to downgrade this machine to Windows, the 3.1.
Yeah, we should run
and run Sim Tower and have Sim Tower on the move. That would be awesome. This is a cool little device for that nostalgia. It's not going to be like for serious work. This is for your DOS fan.
Or there are a lot of industries where there are ancient machines still running. I saw. There's a job listing came up a few months ago. A company wanted a COBOL programmer because they had these, ancient mainframes that have been running since the 60s. And
an on-site technician that needs a 386 processor could just whip it out, for that rare opportunity.
Yeah, you'd probably be surprised at how many 30, 40-year-old systems are still up and running, in dusty server rooms that, someone needs access to or needs to run software made for them on real hardware. So there probably is a market for that as well. There's still websites that sell new floppy disks and stuff,
it'd just be cool to run demos on as well or something. Yeah, I really like this.
Yeah, but like you said, it's the Tom's Hardware effect. It looks like only one of those is available now, and maybe not at the time when this episode comes out, but there is a little video that you can check out, and of course I'll link up the full article and everything else we talk about. You find it all in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now we're going to talk to this week's very special guest. Brian Lowe is coming up on the podcast in just a minute. Before we do that, let's take a moment to give a big thank you to this episode's sponsor, and that is our wonderful friends at Shopify. And if you're a Shopify user, you will love this sound. You know what that sound means, Ravi? That is the sound of making money on Shopify.
Oh yes, I think Shopify is great. It's so hard to set up a stall and kind of to set up all that e-commerce yourself, and Shopify does a lot of it for you.
Yeah, and actually, there is so many different use cases for Shopify as well. It is the all-in-one commerce platform. You can start, run, and grow your business on there as well. And it seems like, at the moment, particularly after, COVID and stuff, a lot of people are starting a side hustle or even becoming their own bosses as well. And that sound means that you've just made another sale on Shopify. Now, I've actually got a friend of mine who he was actually writing some books and originally started to sell them on his own website. And he was doing, like you said, Ravi, he had a form on there, people would have to fill in, he'd have to get in touch with them and ask them to PayPal money over to him. And then he'd have to, get their address off them and email, send it out in the post and everything. Such a headache trying to do that yourself. And the thing is, whatever you're selling online, it could be books, it could be retro games, it could be hardware that you're making, it could be any business, whether you're selling online or even in person as well. Using Shopify just takes the headache completely out of it and lets you grow your business as well. And it covers all of your sales channels. So you've got the shop ready point of sale system to the all-in-one e-commerce platform. One thing that's really cool about Shopify is it even lets you sell across your social media marketplaces.
Oh, that's great.
Stuff like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Takes care of all that for you as well. They're like the market leaders there. And they've got industry-leading tools ready to help your business grow, give you complete control over it as well. And the most important thing, and I think because your day job is web development, isn't it? And the fact is you don't need any coding experience, or you don't have to learn design, do you?
Yeah, that's great. You're not sat there updating it constantly and trying to kind of maintain it. It does a lot of the work for you. And it's also got, 24/7 help as well, and a whole extensive business course library. So it's really good, and it supports you on every step of the way.
Yeah, so it really takes a headache all out of it. And like I said, my friend, he's now selling his books online. Shopify takes care of all of it for him so he can focus on what he really loves doing, which is writing more books. So no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify will be there to give you the confidence and control to take your business to the next level. So if you're selling anything, why don't you try Shopify today? They'll make it a reality for you. And check this out, right? We've got you a great offer. You can sign up for just £1 a month for a trial period by using our exclusive link. Let Shopify know that we sent you there. Helps the podcast out as well. Everyone's a winner. Head to Shopify, that's shopify.co.uk/retro hour. So that's shopify.co.uk/retro hour, and take your business to the next level today and get ready to hear lots of this. And a big thank you to our friends at Shopify for their support of our show. Now, of course, we are getting towards the end of the month again, amazingly. That does mean next weekend it is going to be our favourite weekend of the month. The Patrons Hangout is going to be on. I do actually land back from Pixel Heaven in Poland, I think at 7 p.m. on Sunday evening.
What are you saying? oh yeah, I could just put the patrons chat on in the car and just kind of drive back and have it on in the background, which might work actually.
I don't want to miss it because I love the patrons hangout. So I think, yeah, man, I've got my AirPods. I can just have it on audio only in the car or on the Bluetooth while I'm driving back, or I might hang around in Stansted Airport for an hour and hop on. I really don't want to miss it because it is, it is my favourite.
Dan just at Burger King. Eating
there's a good idea,
making us all jealous.
So if you sign up on Patreon this weekend, you're going to get an invite to the Patrons Hangout that is coming up on the last Sunday of every month. We usually do it, so that'll be Sunday the 28th of May. And Patrons Hangout, I mean, Joe, it's just a giggle, isn't it?
Absolutely. I always see it as just like hanging out with friends, and it's always really funny to see where the conversation goes. Like, obviously it always kind of starts with tech, and then we talk about films. Sometimes we end up talking about like ostriches and emus and what the difference are between them and stuff
and Joe's eyes glaze over when Amiga chat comes on.
Oh yeah,
we return back to another subject.
yeah, we can go from ostriches to Amiga just like that. Like, it is crazy, but I'll keep saying this. I really have made friends on the Patreon Hangout. Like, I'm really looking forward to meeting some of them at Ravi's event as well. Like, it's just an absolute blast. And like Dan says, like, I'd be gutted if you missed it as well, Dan, like, because of it is just like hanging out with mates, having a cider, having a beer. It's really, really cool. And we're looking at like kind of like alternating the dates a little bit.
And it's always good to get some patrons on the show as well. So we'll be having a patron on the show soon as well, because it's always nice to have their input.
Yeah, so if you want to sign up to Patreon right now, it's a very good time. Get invited to the Hangout next weekend. And for our Gold members and above, we will be recording another episode of our bonus podcast, of which there are now 35 episodes that you'll unlock if you back us as a Gold member above or on Patreon. The Retro Hour After Hours, and Joe actually came up with a really good idea. We might be quizzing each other on the next episode.
You've not told
You've
Ravi
seen Mastermind
this.
on T. Yeah, we haven't told Ravi yet, but you've seen Mastermind on telly.
The pressure.
We're going to pick our specialist subject and we're going to quiz each other. This should be a bit of a giggle. So we're going to be recording that next week, so you'll get access to that too. And of course, the main reason that you're doing it, you're joining us on Patreon, is just to support this podcast and make sure that we can keep bringing episodes out every single week. It really helps us out. And of course, we do welcome all new patrons into the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, and that is the Retro Hour Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame.
And a big thank you to our latest backer, that is James Stewart. Thank you so much for your support. And all the details to join us on Patreon, join the community, are on our website at theretrohour.com. Okay, the next, going to get some stories from the days of Strategic Simulations, the legendary Midway, porting arcade games to PCs back in the day, with our very special guest, Ravi, talks to Brian Lowe, next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we're here today with Brian Lowe. We're going to be talking all about Midway, strategic simulations, and porting some of those arcade classics onto the PC and consoles. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. And we've got a question that we always ask our guests, and that takes them to the past a bit. It's, what was your first video game experience?
My first video game experience would have to be when I was a kid at the Coin Ops, playing like Jump Bug, Dragon's Lair, pinball machines, that kind of the old classics that most arcades had at that time. I don't know that there were too many real home systems. I think the ColecoVision and the Atari 2600, those types of things were around, but as a child, I really didn't have much of those. So my time was spent trying to hoard quarters and go to the bowling alley.
Was that the place you went then, the bowling alley, or was there big local arcades as well?
It was a local bowling alley that had all the machines, and it was in between school and home. So any of my lunch money that I could kind of stuff in my pocket, get the experience or stand behind people. And Dragon's Lair was one of those viewing type of games. It was fun. It's fun to watch somebody who knew how to play it lose a quarter real quickly on that one.
Yeah, if it actually worked. I remember that one was quite notorious for like breaking down and getting shut down a lot.
It's a good point. Good point.
I was wondering, when you mentioned systems, did you have any when you were growing up, and did you ever attempt any programming on them?
No, you know what? Growing up, I did not have any computers or game systems. It was all the arcades. In fact, my first day on the job at Strategic Simulations, and this is a running joke with some of the people I still know, the previous execs, I didn't know how to turn the computer on. So, but I was setting up PC compatibility labs in a couple of years at MediaVision. So, but no, I grew up with no computer systems at home. I did some college classes for the Apple IIe programming, and I learned quickly that I'm not strong enough at math. So I stuck with design and production, and biz dev kind of was my career path, not programming.
Well, where did that design come from? Because, we've had lots of guests on the show and they've talked about Dungeons and Dragons being a big influence, certain board games, and kind of seeing games on other people's machines as well.
Yeah, I think like I said, I started at SSI. I was a tester. I don't know how or why, I got into designing for Eye of the Beholder series 2 and then mostly on 3. And at the time, we would use graph paper. I would design, exploration and maps, and we would role play it. And then if it role played well enough, then I would translate that into a level for the game. And it was basically it goes back to high school, from the Dungeons and Dragons that I had all the books, just nerd out on the worlds and read fantasy novels. So it was a wonderful time to explore my imagination and come up with ideas and see people enjoy and role play it. We would, like I said, I was all on graph paper. And at the time, this was like a 28612 PC without Windows. I had to translate all the walls would be an ASCII character. So it had a legend where I translate the map into 286 DOS using ASCII characters. And then the engineers would take that. God knows what they did with it, but it turned into Eye of the Beholder.
Well, I've never heard of people going into ASCII and doing it.
The only time I've seen it before or since. It was I didn't, I was new. I didn't know. I was learning ASCII, so it was kind of cool.
Well, how did you hear about Strategic Simulations, and how did you get the job as a tester?
Yeah, I was at the time in my life. I'm ex-Navy. I was in the U.S. Navy. I had gotten out of the military, and I was looking for direction, just like a young man normally would. And I think at the time, I might have been a valet parker. I was surfing. I was having the time of my life. And my sister, she said, hey, there's a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons looking for a computer tester. And that sounds pretty cool. Let me try that out. Next thing you know, I got the job. But yeah, seemed pretty easy at the time.
Well, what was that process like, that testing process? Did you have a procedure that you had to follow?
Yeah. I guess it was a little different back then because we had to handwrite. All the QA bugs were handwritten at the time. We, established categories and severity, regression testing. Our test department was pretty solid, as I look back now that I have experience with all the test groups, that test team and was very productive, very good at what we did. I think a lot of it was broken out into different skill sets. Certain guys were better at grammar. Or I was better at finishing the game quickly. So we broke it out into responsibilities and skill sets, but maintained a high level of quality when it came to actually writing the bugs. And like I said, it was all handwritten at the time, so it was a little bit more time consuming. Somebody else would then transcribe our handwritten notes into a database. So there was only one person actually entering it all. So we had to make sure it was very clear and legible.
You mentioned there that you didn't have much experience using other computers. How did you, get used to using the Amiga and the PC and the Mac and all these different systems? Did you have to sit down and kind of teach yourself?
It was overtime. At the time, I didn't really call it overtime. It was a different time in the industry. And I was charged up just learning. The consoles at the time, the Commodore 64, double-sided floppies. And to me, it was exciting. And, being able to then go to the Amiga and then opening up the PC for the first time, that was extremely exciting. Like, oh, man, there's these chips and different cards. And what do they all do? It was kind of like having two jobs at some level because the amount of learning that was going on at the time. But yeah, it was just over time. I know, there's a few mentors also, I might say I a lot, but these are all teams and a lot of, very experienced and smart people helped me, get up to speed on what I needed to know, and then probably distracted me a little bit on the to be honest. I dove into the hardware side a little bit and trying to figure out what this chip does and what does that do. And at some point I was like, you know what, that it doesn't matter. That's a sound card, buddy. Just slow down.
Nowadays, there's not that much difference with the Mac and PC. It's pretty much the OS. But back then, it was like black and white, the Mac was. And the Amiga was color and GUI, and they had a command line and the DOS. Was it hard to get used to all these different environments?
No and yes. I think when I went from SSI to MediaVision, and that's really kind of where I say we because it was one of my best friends at the time, and we would set up a complete PC compatibility lab. We had all the chips, we had all the video cards, all the sound cards. We created multi-boots. We were doing third-party production plus QA and compatibility testing. So, back then it was like, the promise of plug and play. It's only really started working in the last year, if you ask me. So it's been a little challenging because I think on some of this tech, like plug and play or Dragonsoft was a voice recognition software that we were working with at the time, and it took weeks to train it to be, near to incompetent. And you kind of forget about it. And then you scoff at this tech, you learn it, you scoff at it, and then a year later it's ready for prime time, and I felt like, I missed it. I should have stuck with it. So it's more about just sticking with it and watching it evolve and being excited with it through the years. I think, there are times where I launched the Vive, and deep diving into VR for 4 years. At some point you get PTSD. I don't want to do NFTs. I've just got done with VR. So, it's about the desire to learn and track all this stuff. It's just exciting. If it doesn't wear you out.
Yeah, I remember some of the voice recognition wasn't as good as it is nowadays at all. I was wondering, you were testing Pools of Darkness and Eye of the Beholder. How much influence did you have? Did you manage to put anything into those games?
Yes. At the time at SSI specifically, and most times actually, all my roles where I've been part of QA, it's either QA production or just QA. I was talking directly with engineers and production, and they were very receptive. Like, hey, this, as a QA, you don't go in and just say this sucks. This isn't optimal, and this would be better. And understanding the limitations of the engine or what they're working with. So I think, again, as I said, the SSI test team, we knew the engines. We knew what they were capable of, and our suggestions were usually only tapered by time. Like, we don't have enough time to get to this. They were always received well. For the most part,
seen as a path to getting onto other things, testing, or just kind of a summer job? For me, it was a career. I had never felt like that before, and I was excited to learn. And I think some came in with summer job, the students that coming in, but I think most people back then saw it as an opportunity to get in the industry, understand what kind of discipline you're good at or like to do, and then strike out from there. I went into production and, biz dev and some of these other areas, but I've never left QA and design behind, right? It's always been there behind me or next to me. It depends on my roles. But I think, at Midway, I remember we had a very large QA department, and all the producers that followed us, the first bunch, were out of QA. And there's a few now I still deal with that are, I pulled them out of QA, we train them, and now they're on the other side of the table. I think I trained some of them too well. Moving out of that fantasy genre, you ended up joining Midway. What was it like joining Midway, and how did you find out about them?
Yeah, Midway, let's see, where was I before? I'm going to guess here. I think I was at North Star Studios in the Bay Area. We had a couple titles canceled. That was so closed the studio at the time. I was on the hunt. I think it was a friend recommendation that they were starting. Midway had just started a production team internally. I didn't know this at the time, but basically Acclaim did that first NBA Jam and made a lot of money. Midway said, well, we should do it ourselves. So he was brought on as the first producer in their third-party group, and we grew from there. It was a pretty charged environment, I'll say that. It was different than SSI.
At Midway, you mentioned the NBA and getting into that kind of sports genre coming from fantasy. What was it like, getting into rosters and all of the kind of sports stuff?
Yeah. So the licensor side of stuff, I would be doing TSR. So, working with the Dungeons and Dragons license or NBA. Two factors, obviously, they're very different in how they handle their IP and their licenses, but also my experience level from just starting in the industry where I didn't know left from right in a lot of ways to now I know my process. I know how to make a game. Now I'm learning more on the IP side. So my eyes were a little bit more open when it came to the NBA. As far as the content goes, I loved NBA Jam. We were playing that before Midway, so it was exciting to be able to work on a title that existed, working with the NBA and bringing these titles home, trying to figure out how do we make these better for the home consoles. Unbeknownst to me, I think we were killing the coin-op market as we were doing it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was interesting at Midway because, obviously they released the coin-op stuff, but also then started doing console ports and PC ports. Did you guys end up getting, some of the original coin-ops and arcade units to reference?
Yes. So I work closely with Chicago. So Chicago, NBA Jam was created in Chicago, Mortal Kombat Chicago. The San Diego office was a home to a lot of the porting mechanisms. When we first started, that was the mandate. When it came to NHL Hits, that was an original through me that was an NBA Jam, NFL Blitz. I was working on the hockey, but for the most part, taking the original code base, working up digital Eclipse, some of these engineers that, they can take this binary code, port it over. Same with Eurocom, they were experts at that. And, what we did was we targeted the market opportunities for the PC, what games went into the package, what made sense, what do we have the code for and the rights, and then worked on those home conversions. And it was, to some degree, it was a little bit evergreen, right? Any new consoles came out. It wasn't the first generation of games that we would want to do, but maybe second or third, we'd do an arcade classic. And I think there's always that retro. It's more retro now than it was then, but it certainly scratches the itch for a lot of gamers, right? That Robotron feel. And then there were times where we were trying to update Joust, Robotron. Like I did Robotron X. Sorry, Eugene Jarvis. But that was the first title I think I had when I came on board at Midway. It was, hey, what do you want to work on? Well, what do you need me to work on? And it was Robotron X. And, we tried to pay as much homage to the original as possible and make it a fun experience. But sometimes I think it's just best to leave those alone and let them stand on their own.
Yeah, it's interesting because touching something that's so loved by so many people, and I kind of loved seeing those classics, ported. But also now you kind of see something and people release it as retro. But back then it would be released with, maybe 10 or 20 years later than the actual machine being out there. So yeah, it's really interesting to see those kind of releases.
Yeah, even that, I think NBA Showtime, NBA Jam to NBA Showtime, and they were like, I think then to NBA Hoops and then Fast Break. So there was, Fast Break was NBA 2K, it was a little different, but though those coin ops were in the environment, we were trying to do at some point, a one-to-one simultaneous launch with, I think it was Showtime. I could be off on that, but they were trying to get them out at the same time as some of these coin ops were being put out. At Midway, internally at San Diego, they were doing coin op development internally at the same time we were doing external development.
Yeah, it's interesting going onto PC at the time and getting, console and arcade ports on there, because a lot of the games were, strategy, and there were quite a lot of serious games on there. Was that kind of an idea to expand that market?
Yeah, is PC distribution at the time. Again, expand the market. If it's Midway, if there was a device that played the games that we could put it on, we would explore that as an option. Handheld, PC, console, as phones. I don't think we did phones at that time, but yeah, we would explore anything just to maximize the business opportunity. It was a challenge to some degree on the PC side, just because it's a keyboard. It's an arcade game designed for quarters, not extended play. Like I think you brought up strategy games. Those are deep. It takes a long time to play. You sit down and you experience it. Where coin ops are meant, here you're holding a beer in one hand and you're shoving a quarter in with the next, and you're having a good time. They're not designed for that type of experience, but we did the best we could.
Yeah. Also, I guess a lot of consoles, come with a gamepad, where the PC would have to have the option of playing with a keyboard or supporting one of these third-party gamepads.
You just brought PTSD again. I forgot about all that. Yeah, Gravis, and they would send us all the support we needed. But it was, reconfiguring your keyboard, gamepad support, all that was part of, a heavy QA cycle and any kind of support we would give. Also had bundling opportunities, I think, for hardware.
And a lot of the time, PCs were more powerful. So did you have any extra options to, use that and improve the graphics? Well,
yeah, the irony of the situation, I think, as PCs evolved, it didn't really apply. We had to tone down frame rate for the coin ops, right? We would lock it at 60, or because of fighting games are very locked to their frame rate, you had to make sure everything was aligned. But yeah, we weren't able to, at least on the retro stuff, maximize too much to the content. It was more about tapering it down.
So that retro stuff, were there any particular favorites that you liked? I know you did Rampage, and that's a classic. It must have been interesting doing those kind of four players at the same time. Yeah,
I'm trying to think. Probably NBA Jam. Like we brought that up a bit. I did a lot of the work with the league, and it's as much about I enjoyed the game before I started at Midway, having the opportunity to work closely with the dev team, but it was also like, I remember still, I got a letterhead from the NBA on some approval addressed to me, right? I was like, ooh, I've arrived. Little memories like that through the years, working with the league on a brand. I love basketball. I was playing it at the time. So I found that to be extremely exciting. But they're all fun. Like you brought up Rampage. You're bringing stuff up that I completely forgot about for all these years, seeing Rampage at E3 and the costume guys walking around, and you're like, oh, that's my game. That's funny.
I love Rampage. It's been ported to so many systems. It's even got a movie now. I was wondering, what was the first time you saw Mortal Kombat like?
Yeah. I think before Midway. And I hate to say it publicly, but I was a Street Fighter guy. I really enjoyed the rotation of the buttons rather than left, right, up, down is play style on the buttons. But I didn't really do too much on Mortal Kombat. I think I did a Game Boy and a couple other smaller ones. But those, fighting games to me, I enjoy. It's more of a moment to play, but developing them at times is a bit more tedious than I wanted. I think there was a certain, once we got our staff up at Midway, we were able to kind of, assign different products that, who fit better personality types for the products, where I stuck more on the sports, and I kind of didn't want to work on the fighting stuff too much. I think I later did a Street Fighter HD online fighting for PlayStation, I think it was, but that one was a little better because I like Street Fighter. But don't.
Yeah, that was mad. I remember it was Mortal Kombat Trilogy, and it had about 30 characters in it. Was that a bit of a task?
Yeah, sometimes it really, if it's a port and it's a good code base and the dev team, it comes together quite quickly. It's that last bit where you're QAing and there are just finding edge cases. And if you don't enjoy, I guess it goes back down to QA. If you don't enjoy that kind of process of cleaning stuff up, you might not enjoy it, but I sure do.
There was a whole new aspect that came in on the PC that wasn't available on the consoles at the time, and that was networking. Was it a bit of a task to, get that all tested and get everything working all at the same time?
Yes. In the early days, I always think, and I think engineering always has some mystery bug bucket that if they don't know what's going on, that's what they say. In the old days, it was memory leaks. That's a memory leak. It's going to take a while. And then it buys them time. The internet popped up, and now it's packet loss and latency. So there was always something. And it was, I remember, I'm trying to think of where, even SSI, Dark Sun, they had an online mode back in 91. I didn't even realize it until later. We didn't really test it, or as I recall testing it. I think, moving, forward in time at Midway, we were looking at a lot of arcade class, Open Ice or any of these kind of games, and we gave them to, I forgot the company's name, to evaluate, to see if it could be overcome to actually play these games online. It did not deem viable at the time at Midway. Moving forward, this might be one of those technologies where I was like, geez, all this internet stuff, it's going to take a long time. And I blinked, and then, oh, wow, everything's working great through dial-up now. So it's been a process. It's kind of amazing that kind of technology is just in and of itself, like phones, internet. None of this was around when I started.
Yeah, it was that kind of buzzword at the time, wasn't it? Network play. And, it was kind of never really like fully established until, it came onto the consoles and it got a bit more mainstream. I remember the lag at the time.
Right? I remember Midway 4K. I think it was a 4K. It might have been even 1080. But, following technology and making sure we're cutting edge and available on it, it's a constant, I don't want to call it uphill or a struggle, but you just always have to be aware of the technology. In the game industry, it's changing a lot faster. Movies, they don't advance their technology; they advance some techniques. Gaming every year is some new device, and we have to, adapt to it. It's kind of a challenge, but that again is part of the excitement. You have to follow all these business model trends, freemium. You have to follow the hardware from coin-op to PC to phone model, and how do you apply those two variables to a new game? Right? You got to design a game to the hardware and to the consumer base that's going to pay. This is just an ongoing part of the business that, again, what excites me. It's like I turn around and, I don't know anything the next day. Better pay attention.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well because around that time, compared to now, there was such a choice of consoles, and it was kind of hard to pick which one was going to be the next successful one. And talking of that, what did you think about the Sega Saturn?
Sega Saturn, I vaguely remember, to be quite honest. That was a blip. They were coming. Hardware was coming and going so fast. It was, for me at the time, I believe it was kind of like technical evaluation on content. If it was a port, we kind of already knew what our memory requirements were and limitations. It was almost more about the development, the partner relationships that the hardware manufacturers had, as Sony, Nintendo, Sega, Microsoft, any of these companies. As we started working closely with them to put content on their hardware, I was probably more on that relationship side than it was, creating assets that go into the game. But they were just learning as they were going as well.
You mentioned relationships there, and I was wondering, with Nintendo kind of releasing games and you releasing games on Nintendo systems, were they a bit stricter than others? Were others a bit lax, or what were the kind of rules like?
Oh, Chopper Attack, yeah. Yeah, I did a lot of N64. They all, I'm trying to, so between the big three, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sega at the time, I think was probably bigger than Microsoft. The Xbox hadn't came out yet, but they all had, Sony was probably the hardest. They would do a concept submission. So before you had the right to even develop the game, they had to approve a concept. Then they developed it. Then they had to approve it to be manufactured on their discs, etc. Nintendo, I think, was less strict up front, but all of them were very good at a quality bar and making sure the bugs, were found. They did their own, some layer of testing. And they would come back. I can't remember specifics on which ones. Probably mostly Sony. Fix this, fix that before we approve it. So they were all pretty serious about it. But depending where you were, like Midway, I think there was a Mortal Kombat one out with a crash bug in it. It got found. But it was, we knew about it. There was Toys R Us ads, $1 million a day penalty that, you hear about all this stuff, and they leverage those top level relationships to get approved. But they're all pretty serious about it.
You mentioned the PlayStation there, and you did the Midway Classic collections for them. And I was wondering, were they like run with emulation then, and how important was it to get them, accurate and close to the original?
Yeah, it depends on the game. I think some might have been emulators, if not a lot. I think Digital Eclipse, again, all credit to them. Almost all my PC arcade classics, or most any of them, went through those guys. They had the original ROMs. They backward engineer them. They ran emulators. And it had to be one to, if I was doing it, I wanted it 1-to-1. Like, that didn't feel right, or, we would try to get it as accurate as possible to the source. And I mean, at the time, I don't think this King of Kong, Donkey Kong, championships and all that stuff was relatively not happening, or relatively in the back behind the scenes. But we still felt the same way. If you were on an arcade and you had a high score and you felt it and you had patterns, Pac-Man patterns, we would make sure that that the games that we were shipping were the same, as at least as close as we could.
I think it's so important that making sure that there's like no lag or keeping that pace and the same speed as the original game would have.
That's right, and that's what I said earlier. So I think at some point PCs, frame rate, everything got cranked up, and we'd have to reduce it all down to the right speeds and frame rate for that, to make sure it's all right. And tried, like I said, 1-to-1 as close as we could.
A title that came out back then was a quite underrated character, Gex the Gecko, and he originally came out on the 3DO, and really interesting, kind of groundbreaking title that was.
That's right.
Did you think Gex was underrated?
I do. So that was an interesting, because again, we got the rights from, I think, 3DO or at the time, and there was people on the other side of the fence I knew. So I was like, okay, it was that and Pandemonium. I produced both of those at the same time. I liked Gex. I was actually a little bit like released. It didn't do all that great. I don't remember what the numbers were, but I remember somebody saying, well, it's a gecko. It won't do well in Japan because they're cockroaches. I just couldn't understand. I do. I do think it's a little underrated. Not sure why. I thought it was a cool character and a fun game.
Well, we've got to mention Pandemonium then, because that was a really interesting title. That kind of 2.5D. You had 3D, and it was still kind of a side-scrolling platformer. What was the development like around that title then?
Pandemonium was easy. Actually, there was a producer over there that I worked with closely, Carolyn, and I recall it went so smooth that Gex was less smooth. Pandemonium was smooth. I spent more time trying to figure out problems on Gex, and I realized it wasn't about the product on this. My lesson I learned on these was more about spend more time with the quality people. Just don't overlook them, because it was a smooth process. It was porting, plus I think we did some special content for the hardware manufacturers would want. Hey, you're not just going to port it, do something special. It all went really smooth on Pandemonium. So I really, for me, I remembered more about Gex because I was going through some approvals and some contract stuff, and it was just a pain in the ass. And I look back and I go, man, I should have spent more time on Pandemonium because that one was a joy.
Yeah, I loved it. It came out over time when there was lots of like violent games and stuff, and it was just this kind of family-friendly, fun kind of title.
Yeah, I mean, we would do things at E3. or, any kind of press events. Occasionally they'll con me into getting onto some interview or something, something like this. I'm not the best public speaker, but yeah, I would attend those now and then. Honestly, sometimes when those events happen, I prefer just hanging out with some of the dev team and just keeping on the quiet side.
You kind of were doing something that we nowadays call demakes, which was, kind of cutting down games and putting them on the Game Boy Color. What were the tough decisions that you had to do back then?
So going back, my memory not be serving me well. I think I worked on a Mortal Kombat and a 720. I'd already done the PC and other ports where I knew what 1-to-1 was, and I couldn't do that on the Game Boy Color. I felt at the time I was doing the game and the hardware at disservice. There were times it was a management, like, hey, it's a smaller system, it's a smaller budget. And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. And I really feel like I missed an opportunity to create great content on the Game Boy Color, because we were trying to cram some of these, known IPs and using existing code bases. And to me, it was I did a disservice to the hardware, I think, if I want to be honest. Not that I had much control over budget or any of that, but I just felt like some of the quality could have been better.
The Xbox 360 was kind of an interesting console. It had Xbox Live Arcade, and it kind of embraced some of those older games and older titles. What did you think of it, and did you see it as a kind of home for some of these older titles?
Yeah, when we started first talking to Xbox, at the time, Midway had relationships with all the hardware manufacturers. So as PS2, PS1, any of that new hardware, we received an allotment of dev kits first. So I remember first looking at the Xbox, and then at the time, it was the promise of PC compatibility. Oh, plug and play, all the things I said earlier. And again, of course, it wasn't as clean as all that. Their first controller was super large. It looked like a medieval weapon, like a morning star on the end of the stick or something.
that was the one, wasn't it?
It was huge. And so, we looked at it, and there were certain obvious things that we were thinking about. But at the end of the day, I think it was a step in the right direction for us from the ease of development, as far as, knowing it's portable, right? Not portable like carrying, but able to port easily.
Yeah, you brought some of the kind of older titles onto that system, like Gunstar Heroes, Sonic and Knuckles, Phantasy Star 2, and Shinobi. And I was wondering, did you have like extra features like the achievement system and stuff like manuals? Yeah,
I think it was starting to. I mean, if you're going to say like taking that title to the Game Boy, it was a lot more challenging on all levels. When you're able to have it port a lot easier because of the PC architecture, it opened up more opportunities for your development dollars to be spent on achievements and all these things that you just suggested. So that was one of the big benefits. It wasn't plug and play like they promised, or it wasn't smooth as silk, but it certainly was a lot easier once everybody started getting up to speed. And again, they had no submission standards. And as I recall, we would submit something, they would fail it. They would fail it for a big reason. Their reason wasn't in the standards. Then their next revision of the standards has the reason. So you're kind of growing with these companies as you're submitting as well. So, it's a learning curve is all ongoing. One
title that I absolutely adore for the 360 was Sonic Generations. What was it like working on that title, and for such a iconic brand as well?
Again, a great experience. I think through the years with the different IPs, and although I didn't create it, I'm just part of the team that's going to bring it. It's making sure you understand the importance that it is such an iconic title, So for me, it was, again, like the NBA story I said earlier, this is another one of those moments where you're like, don't mess this one up. This is important. So it was it was another good experience.
What did you think of that method of, flipping back to the original old school mode? Because I've seen so many titles that now use that and have like implemented it into a lot of games. It's kind of becoming standard.
Well, I think at the time we thought it was a good idea, and so we decided to go with it. But you always run the risk, I guess, if you're going to go back and have something that's forward looking, that the comparison is too obvious. But I think it worked out.
And Sonic Generations has kind of led to the fantastically successful Sonic Mania. And I was just wondering, out of all the titles that you've worked on, is there anything that's been your favorite or really stood out?
I do get asked this a lot when they find out how long you've been doing this, how many games. I'm gonna say NHL Hits might be one of my favorites, and I give you a little context. For me, it's team based. Like, after you finish a game, you work closely with these people, your team, whatever the product is. Still to this day, how do you feel when you're done? You can have this successful game, but you don't like anybody that you worked with. To me, that's not good. NHL Hits was a rare situation where, everybody was aligned. The product came out. It was a great relationship with the developer. It was a hit game, and it was just fun the whole time, the whole way through. You go through ups and downs through my career of that type of process. There are certain places where I'm like, man, it's a great IP, but it's not working with this team that I don't enjoy being around every day. So leaving SSI, and I didn't know what I had, at the time. Oh, this is gaming. This is the way everybody is. SSI was always, and almost to this day, a benchmark of how I like to work with people. And it takes a while to find that kind of dynamic. And NHL Hits was one of them. So, yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, this is how much time we got, but I think it's the personal stories that matter to me as much as the games when I start talking about that topic.
And finally, I was wondering, what have you been up to, and what are you working on nowadays? Yeah,
I started at Amber about 3 years ago. I'm a game director. Since then, I've worked on Super Spy Ryan, mobile, Tetris Beat, which again, working on old classic. I did Tetris, right? I'm still doing the old classics. I'm currently working on Temple Run 3, and the game director at Amber.
Tetris. Well, Tetris is an absolute classic, isn't it? People are still loving it today. And I was just wondering, actually, have you seen the movie?
No, I haven't. Yeah, that was a big part of when we were working on it. We were timing, releases around it, and I've seen the preview. I haven't seen the movie yet. It's sometimes I have to say at times I don't enjoy watching movies related to our industry. It's I don't know why. I think as much as I enjoy it, I try to separate it a little bit. Like it's I use entertainment as a reference point, not as a. I'm not a spectator sport.
Yeah, I guess if you're in it, it's not as entertaining as it is being on the outside.
Yeah. Also, Tetris Beat. There was a lot of work done on that. It turned out exactly what we wanted. I don't think we didn't hit critical success. I think if you don't like EDM music and Tetris, I mean, you're not probably going to get into it. But it is certainly a fun game. But again, having worked on it for a year and a half, and then seeing a movie about it, kind of like, I've had enough. I'll see you next year.
Well, Brian, it's been a fantastic chat about your personal history, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
No, I did. Thank you so much. Memory lane. Now.